Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Wanted to say hello. I'm Preston. I work on the 3R team in business development, and I'm also a sustainability consultant. I'm really excited to have you all here today because on calls with prospective clients, we hear the stress about SBTi all the time. And one of my favorite parts about my job is seeing kind of the stress melt away when myself or one of my teammates kind of explains something differently or gives someone a piece of information that helps them do their job better. So I'm excited to have Megan and CY here today to hopefully do a little bit of that. But before jumping in, I'd love to give a bit of background for who we are. 3R is a full-service sustainability consultant firm that works in a variety of different industries, helping folks with a variety of different services, anything from sustainability management systems, climate-related work, greenhouse gas emissions measurement and target setting, and work in the built environment and energy reduction. We also have an assurance branch that provides third-party data validation and assurance. So if you're looking for help with any of those things, you have our information. We have a variety of webinars throughout the year, and you can stay in the loop on our schedule through LinkedIn or our mailing list. You could scan the QR code in the slide to kind of attend the webinars, and anything is free to attend. And all the recordings are up on our website as well. So if you ever see anything on LinkedIn that you missed out on, those are available on our website. Our upcoming webinars include content from our assurance division that I was just mentioning, talking about how assurance can enhance trust within your stakeholder groups and build business value. And our climate team will also be hosting another webinar in June focused on CDP disclosures, which is everyone's favorite topic, how to unlock value behind your CDP submission. And then in July, I'm really excited that we're having a webinar on double materiality. That's a really hot topic for a lot of our clients, and I'm hopeful that that will kind of do the same thing, melt some stress away about materiality. So I want to introduce today's panelists. We have CY, a senior consultant at 3R, and oh, sorry, my slides got all messed up. One moment. Technical difficulties. CY might have you introduce yourself. So sorry. One second.
Sounds good. Hey everyone, I'm CY. I'm a senior consultant here at 3R. I work in the climate team with Megan and three other colleagues. Mainly do a lot of greenhouse gas inventories as well as the target setting work, and also work on a lot of sports projects, which is something that I'm really passionate about. Pass it on to Megan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Megan. I'm also a consultant on the sustainability and climate team. Like CY said, we do a lot of work with greenhouse gas emissions, as well as these greenhouse gas target reduction planning and setting SBTi aligned targets. CY said he works on sport projects because he's passionate about it. I also get to work on some zero waste initiatives. So that's my other passion outside of climate itself.
Thank you both so much. Script has crashed, but we're back at it. So today our agenda is as follows. We'll give a brief overview of SBTi, also known as Science-Based Targets Initiative, and discuss the business case and benefit of setting those science-based targets. Then we'll dive more into the process. So giving a kind of step-by-step of how setting a science-based target would look like. And then also some challenges we've seen with customers and clients. So we've helped a lot of folks through this process and can go through some common challenges and how to overcome them. So yeah, to start, Megan, can you give us a quick explanation of SBTi?
Yes, of course. So like Preston said, SBTi is the Science-Based Targets Initiative. And this is a corporate climate action organization It's partnered with the World Resources Institute and the Worldwide Fund for Nature. There's also some other alignments with CDP and other organizations. Preston, I'm not sure if you're able to go to the next slide. Perfect. Thank you so much. So the goal of SBTi is to help companies and financial institutes to drive them to combat the climate crisis through setting greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. SBTi has created these standards, tools, and guidance for companies to set these reduction targets following the latest climate science and being aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement, which is to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. The real overarching goal of science-based targets is to offer companies a clear, actionable path to reducing their emissions. And on the next slide, you'll see that while the overall goal of SBTi is to reduce emissions and reach net zero, there are many other benefits to committing to SBTi and setting these targets, which really helps make the business case for SBTi. You can see it can boost brand reputation as consumers become increasingly aware of the effects their choices have on the environment. SBTi published a study in 2018 that reflected 79% of corporate executives found a strengthened brand reputation to be one of the most significant business benefits of their company. And it's not only customers that use sustainability as a factor and guide in decision-making. Investors are also increasingly taking interest in businesses' environmental performance. From that same survey, 52% of executives say that their science-based target commitment has boosted investor confidence in their business. To look at resiliency in the specific frame of regulation, setting science-based targets can create resilience against upcoming or current regulations. If you have any interest in other, information on climate-related regulations, our team did a webinar previously, and there's a recording of it on our website that talks about the different current and upcoming climate regulations. Another large benefit to setting science-based targets is innovation. The transition to a low-carbon economy is growing, and companies that are aligning their strategies with this are opening themselves up to a world of opportunity and innovation among their products and services. And last but absolutely not least is financial savings. Setting targets can help companies find ways to operate more efficiently, leading to savings from energy consumption, reduced material costs, and many other line items in their budgets. As Preston mentioned, we're going to walk through the process for setting science-based targets in detail, but here's a high-level overview of that process. As you can see, there are two routes depending on the company type, either corporates and financial institutions, or small and medium enterprises. Standard-sized companies must start by registering online with SBTi services and submitting a commitment letter, and then move on to developing a target using SBTi tools and submitting that target online. Once the targets are validated, they need to be communicated publicly, and then annual progress towards those targets must be disclosed. For SMEs, the small and medium enterprises, it's a slightly more simplified process. They also must register through SBTi services, but they can skip that commitment letter phase. And the development of the target is done by selecting a predefined option within the portal rather than using SBTi's tools. The rest of the steps are the same for SMEs as they are for corporates. To be eligible to follow this simplified SME route, there are a few criteria that have to be met. The organization's annual emissions must be less than 10,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, and they cannot be classified as financial institution or oil and gas organization. And they also cannot be required to use any of the sector-specific methods, such as forest, land, and agriculture, cement, chemicals, and others that are all listed on the SBTi website. And the organization cannot be a subsidiary of a parent company that qualifies for that standard route that we just looked at. And then additionally, 3 or more of the following must be true: their employee count threshold, turnover threshold, and total assets threshold, as well as not falling into the sectors of financial, insurance, banking, or asset management.
Thanks, Megan. This feels like a good one to take a screenshot of if anyone's wondering if they might be SME or not. CY, could you walk us through the steps that Megan started off on in a bit more detail?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, as you saw in Megan's sort of slide at the high level, the first step is to register. So you have to create an account for you personally on the portal. And then once you do that, you'll need to register your company with some required information listed on this slide. You'll also find more details in the registration manual, or even SBTi does have a YouTube channel that helps you guide through this process. So you can also go on their YouTube channel to look at sort of the step-by-step guide. There will be some documentation required to upload in order for them to validate sort of the revenue numbers and total asset numbers of the company. And then there are specific contacts that you'll need to register as well. So in addition to the ones listed here, if you have consultants like us that help you with the whole process, the inventory process, the validation process, you can add us as additional contacts. So then we can be on the email list during the validation process that helps you sort of de-stress the whole process and sort of let us take the response from the validator to help you with that whole process. So once registration is completed, you'll have to wait for SBTi to approve your account and your company, and then move forward to the commitment step. So once you're ready to commit, this step only applies to the standard size companies. So SMEs do not need to commit, or there is not even an option for you to commit. So once you first is to select your targets, which we'll go into deeper in the next few slides, then review and agree to the commitment compliance policy. And then once committed, it's just a couple of checkbox, and once you sign it, your company will be recognized as committed on their website and on their dashboard. And then once you also commit, there is the time, sort of the clock starts where the company has 24 months to submit its target to SBTi. We do strongly encourage you to submit targets for validation within 18 months of signing the letter, just to allow a 6-month period, just in case you need to update or anything that happens. So that is sort of a recommendation on our end. So to get started with setting SBTi targets, we highly recommend reviewing the guide that SBTi provides, and also their criteria and recommendations of how to develop a target. And then is to calculate your organization's baseline greenhouse gas inventory. For this step, like, there are tools that help SMEs to sort of develop their inventory through the SME Climate Hub. And then you also want to make sure to determine whether you are applicable to any sector-specific guidance and requirements for your company. There are tools, which is the target setting tool on the SBTi portal, to begin developing targets. So what that tool really does is that it'll allow you to input your inventory, so your scope 1 and 2 emissions. And if you need to also develop a scope 3 target, they'll let you input your scope 3 numbers, and then you'll be able to select a base year, target year, and then that tool will tell you what your percentage reduction is. So when you sort of look into different target options, you'll be able to compare and see what is most reasonable for your company. Sweet. So here's a comparison table of the two main targets that SBTi has. So the near-term target, which is a 5 to 10-year time frame, the purpose of it is to really drive immediate emissions reductions within this short period of time. It is mandatory for SBTi validation, so you must set near-term targets for scope 1 and 2, and if your scope 3 is 40% or above of your total emissions, then you do also have to set scope 3 targets. There are different types of targets. So there are absolute and also intensity-based reduction targets that are aligned with the 1.5 degree or well below 2 degree Celsius scenario. you are not allowed to use any offsets to meet these targets, and the reporting frequency is annually. Moving forward with the net zero targets, that is a much longer term target. So by 2050 or earlier, the purpose is to really achieve long-term decarbonization aligned with a more aggressive pathway, so the 1.5-degree pathway. It is optional for you to whether to commit to this target or not. But scope 1, 2, and 3, all material scope 3 categories are applicable to this target. The overall reduction percentage is from 90 to 95% of absolute emissions reduction. And why is it called net zero is because you have to sort of do that 90 to 95% reduction, and then anything else that's residual, you can use offsets to offset them to cover those emissions. The reporting frequency is the same as near-term targets, so that's annual reporting. And if there are any questions related to the steps, we do have some time at the end to answer any questions, so feel free to put it in the chat or leave us a note. So once you do have those targets, you have your sort of target reduction, target year all set. The next step is to submit a target. So within sort of the next steps, complete the relevant forms for organization type of target. So there are two main documents that you have to fill out. One's the corporate target submission form, which includes some of your company's information, your baseline, your greenhouse gas inventory. So a lot of the data that's involved in methodology that's involved in calculating your baseline year, that'll be where you'll be submitting that data to SBTi for their validation. And the target setting tool is to pretty much confirm the target that you're setting. So which baseline year you're setting, which target year you're setting, and what the reduction target is. Sign the agreement, submit payment for the validation of targets. Then throughout the validation process, you'll communicate with the assigned technical expert or the sort of the lead assessor, a reviewer of your SBTi target during the validation process, and then you will receive a validation decision with in-depth feedback on the target. Cool. So it's a little bit different for SMEs for sort of submitting target. It's a lot more simple. So you do have sort of predefined options for SMEs. So there are three options. The first one's the near-term target that sets new or existing reductions for near-term scope 1 and 2 targets. Scope 3 is not required, but you do have to commit to measure and reduce scope 3 for SMEs. There is also a maintenance target, which is setting new near-term maintenance targets for those that have already achieved zero scope 1 and 2 emissions. And there's also a long-term net zero target similar to sort of standard route. So this is only available to SMEs with already SBTi approved near-term targets. So quite similar to the standard route, but there are sort of a special, I guess, treat for SMEs. Here's a little bit of a table for the fees, just a reference. They do, SBTi do update these fees here and then. So this is sort of the most updated fee, and just for reference, there are more information of what the other sort of services that they provide surrounding your targets would cost. But this is just sort of a good reference for near-term net zero submissions. And then if you do both at the same time, you do get a package rate. So corporate and then small and medium-sized enterprises obviously get a steep discount for the submission fees. Cool. So once all of that process is set, so you've registered, you've committed, you've developed your targets, and then you've submitted, and SBTi has given you the good to go approved targets. they will publish your company on their dashboard, but then you are required to publish the target externally within 6 months of the validation, and or else you will be required to revalidate the targets that you've set. You will receive a welcome pack from SBTi with a lot of information on how to best communicate your targets with others. And that is sort of the whole point of it. Celebrate with sort of a lot of external communications and internal communications to get everyone engaged on your decarbonization journey. Cool. So after you've gotten approved, you communicated with others. This is in the long term. For annually, you do have to disclose your emissions and progress against that target to keep companies accountable for their SBTi targets. So some recommendations that we do have for reporting these progress annually include disclosures through CDP, your annual sustainability reports, or just sort of a press release on the company website will also fulfill this requirement.
Thanks, UI. I feel like that step-by-step is super helpful and just kind of breaking it down, making it a bit more digestible. So thank you. And like CY mentioned, there is a Q&A function. So if anything comes up throughout this, feel free to post that on there and I'll either interrupt or wait for questions at the end. Megan, moving on to challenges. Can you kind of begin to speak through the common challenges that we've seen?
Of course. So everyone's inventory is, somewhat unique. So we just pulled together a couple of challenges that we could kind of generally speak about and how we would help a client overcome those challenges. So in terms of setting an accurate baseline inventory, some common challenges is just having incomplete data across scopes 1, 2, or 3. Especially due to limited supplier data for scope 3. It's also, can be difficult to engage with stakeholders. So to address this, I know the text is a little small on the screen, but we would, try to help our clients conduct a data readiness assessment and use kind of 1 year to identify the gaps found. We could also establish, clear data collection protocols and assign owners. That way there's no confusion with our clients of who's responsible for what. We try to help them know who the data is coming from by department, by individual, however fits their business. We also, can provide training and more clear communication on the importance of scope 3, not just what it is, but how important it is and how large it can be. It's, almost always the largest, part of your inventory. So explaining the importance of it is something that we try to be really clear with our clients on and how it impacts their science-based targets. We can also help incentivize suppliers to share the emissions data through sustainability-linked procurement to help kind of give them a carrot so that they can help give us the data we need to help our clients get these, targets set with a real accurate baseline inventory. Another kind of common challenge header would be the meeting the validation criteria. So some common issues are either missing emission categories or scopes, or having those near-term targets fall outside of the 5 to 10 year frame. To avoid this, we are very careful with our review of the SBTi criteria and the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Scope 3 standard to ensure that all applicable categories are included to have a complete inventory to meet the criteria. This includes, conducting a full emissions mapping exercise to identify all of the material sources. And additionally can engage with external consultants to audit the category coverage before submission. In terms of kind of the time period, we're very careful of knowing when within the year it impacts, if it's in the 5 to 10 year, because it does matter if you're in the first 6 months or the second 6 months of the year. So our experience going through this with clients in the past has helped us to know what hurdles to avoid altogether before we even get to these problems.
Thanks, Megan. That's helpful. We know things are changing, things are shifting around all the time, especially in our industry, especially these days. What are some upcoming changes to SBTi?
Yeah, so SBTi recently announced there is a draft standard of the net zero standard. It will be kind of version 2.0 is it's still in a draft. It's under consultation review for another couple of weeks where they're soliciting feedback. And then there plans to be a second round of review after the feedback has been evaluated and pilot testing after that. So it's still far from being finalized, but the goal of the draft update is to make the standard more rigorous and practical at the same time. We are wanting to just highlight some of the major proposed changes and want to reiterate all of these are subject to change during the consultation period and testing. We have a table that shows kind of the current version, which is version 1.2, and then the draft proposed changes. So you can see, as CY talked about, there's different routes. There's kind of the standard for corporate companies, and then there was the SME. One major change is creating categories for companies that are going to be based on company size and geographic locations. So category A companies would be responsible for following all criteria, which is sort of what the standard corporates follow now. And category B companies would be similar to SMEs, and they'd be offered flexibility with some criteria being optional. The commitment phase would change as well. Rather than just committing on the website by accepting their policy, there's a public net zero commitment being proposed. That would be a little bit of a change. Additionally, in terms of assurance, there would be a new requirement for those category A companies to obtain third-party limited assurance on their base year inventory. So currently you can get your inventory assured and include that in your science-based targets initiative sort of proposed targets. But the draft is, suggesting it could be required. And then in terms of the target setting themselves, you can see scope 1, 2, and 3 targets can be combined currently. Especially, scopes 1 and 2 is often a combined target, but the proposed change would have separate targets be required for each scope. And not just an individual scope 2 target, there would now be a location-based scope 2 target and either a market-based or zero carbon electricity scope 2 target. So instead of combining scopes 1 and 2, you'd have to do scope 2 in 2 different ways. And then some of the largest changes for scope 3, currently there's a fixed minimum boundary for companies. It's a 60% reduction for near-term targets and a 90 to 95% reduction for long-term. The boundary would change in this draft to focus instead on the most relevant emission sources for the company and where they have the most influence. So rather than focusing on just emissions reduction targets, there'd also be a greater emphasis on non-emission metrics, which could include targets for, your share of procurement being allocated to net zero aligned suppliers and other, actions like that that are not solely a reduction in emissions, but are still focusing on the same goals. So again, all in a draft. 3R keeps a close eye on things like this, and we'll constantly be making sure that our clients are aware and also trying to use our kind of platform through our website and LinkedIn to make sure everyone else is aware as well.
Thanks, Megan. It's very helpful. Again, that might be a good screenshot one. I'll stay on it for a couple more seconds just in case anyone wants to save that. But we do have some time for Q&A, so take advantage of these very good resources. We have a couple already to whoever asked about the recording and presentation deck. The recording will be shared, not the deck itself, but it will be in the recording. So hopefully that's helpful. And then a more logistical question. How long is validation of the submitted goals taking place? If the deadline for submitting SBTi targets is December 2025, should we submit the targets by that day, or should they already be approved by that time? If we need follow-up questions, we can ask.
I believe the specific rule is by that day you have to submit it. But highly we don't encourage any company to do that. Just because of, I don't know, anything could happen if you submit a deadline. So yeah, I think our recommendation is to always sort of save some time for that whole process to get to save yourself some time for like the validation process and sort of your target. I guess you want to get your validation approved by your deadline.
Right. So usually 6 months, right? So maybe submit by June if you need to get it finalized by December.
Yeah, on the safe end.
And then I don't, it's all good if we don't know the answer right away, we can always come back. But is it possible to set SBTi near-term targets to 2030 without also committing to the entire net zero path up to 2050?
Yes, you are required to set the near-term target within the 5 to 10 year range, but the net zero is optional. So that is yes, that is okay to do that.
Yeah. What are the most common issues you've seen raised during the validation phase?
It's funny because we were just responding to one this morning. So I'll use that as an example. Um, I think SBTi does do like the validator does do a little bit of research on the company itself and the business model of the company. So, for example, acquisitions, they do want to make sure that you do include all the subsidiaries of your company. If you do have sort of subsidiaries below the main company that's committing to SBTi. So those are common questions of whether you've included those activity data into the baseline year inventory. That is one very, very common question. And also sort of category 4, which is for scope 3, which is sort of the upstream transportation distribution of your purchased products. They also want to make sure that you've either included them in category 1, where a lot of times the emission factor might be including that section of the emissions, or you want to make sure to include it in category 4 itself. So a lot of sort of the organizational boundary, making sure that everything's included correctly and categorized correctly in the baseline year inventory. Those are sort of the very common questions that we get asked during the validation process.
Can divisional levels set science-based targets without the corporate level?
Divisional as in
Guessing
subsidiary?
subsidiary, yeah. They didn't specify,
Yes.
but I'm guessing.
Yes, you can, but SPTI, this is also recently,
Yeah,
Preston would know.
we were just talking about
Recent,
this.
yeah, so you can submit as a subsidiary, but SPTI does require, like, I guess prefer the parent company to submit the target. And if your parent company submits a target, the subsidiary like needs to be included in that target. So what that also means is that the subsidiary is also sort of needs to reach that target by the target year. But you can set more ambitious targets as a subsidiary. That is an option.
Thanks for helping with that. And if that person has any additional questions, we'd be happy to chat with you further. The changes for Net Zero 2.0, any idea when we know if these will be mandatory? First question.
There's not been a clear timeline. The first consultation period closes in June, so they've been kind of requesting feedback for a couple months now, and then I'm guessing there'll be at least a month or two of reviewing that, a couple more months of implementing any suggested changes, and then another round of consultation review. So I would say it's at least a year at minimum away, because they also want to do some pilot testing. So I think we've got a while. And who knows what those changes will bring. But this is kind of, the current state of things. So I would say well over a year is my guess, but obviously they haven't made it super clear yet, so I can't confirm.
Yeah, this person had a follow-up of how companies with existing approved commitments might need to update theirs to align with the updated standard, but I'm guessing that would be included in the final version, right?
Yes, they do have a current kind of transition plan in place for companies with existing targets. They would be able to keep their targets. And then when those targets expire, for instance, if you set a near-term target that needs to be met by 2030, if you were to set a new target, you'd be using the updated version. But for, currently committed and, validated targets would not need to redo the process until those targets have kind of reached their expiration date.
Okay, great. I feel like I'm really drilling you guys, but we're getting great questions, so I'm keeping it going.
I'd like to add on to the question about the 24-month period. So
Okay.
it is confirmed that it is 24 months when you have to submit your targets, but there is a normal sort of a 3-month wait when you get assigned a lead reviewer for you to go through that validation process. But it is confirmed 24 months is when you submit, not when you need to be validated.
Okay. Thanks for looking into that real quick. Another pretty specific question. Do you have any insight into the expected changes around bundled versus unbundled recs in version 2, or too early to say?
Okay, go ahead, Siwa. I don't remember seeing anything in V2 specifically about bundled or unbundled, but it was a very long update, so I think that wasn't called out as a main change yet. But Siwa, go ahead.
I think the big sort of difference is that you'll need to be setting targets for both location-based and market-based for scope 2. So I think that highly relates to bundled versus unbundled renewable energy credits, and the role that it plays in sort of your decarb journey or sort of meeting your targets. But sort of relating to that market instrument, there are talks or there are discussions in both SBTi and greenhouse gas protocol updates that these market instruments will be allowed to play a role in scope 1 and scope 3 emission reductions. So I think it's still too early to tell, but there are sort of discussions around how a bigger role these market instruments can play in the sort of overall decarbonization journey for organizations.
Thank you. What happens if the target is not approved?
I can take that one. So if it's not approved, you'll receive pretty detailed feedback from SBTi about why. They won't just say no and that's that. They'll give you some insight into what the reasoning was. And you'd be encouraged to take that feedback, make some updates, and resubmit. That's where 3R works really hard to, like I said, not just overcome hurdles, but avoid them before they even arise. So trying to make sure that we are working with the validator from SBTi on behalf of our clients to be really clear with our answers to make sure that validators understand everything and have been able to have clients get their targets validated. So yeah, it's an unfortunate thing that does happen, but you would be encouraged to try again, and 3R would definitely work hard to help make sure that it doesn't happen again and that you do get your targets validated.
Awesome. I think we have one final question for the rec question. If we could elaborate on any impacts that scope 1 or scope 3 might have on changing the recs, the types of recs.
Yes, I guess I'll clarify, not specific to Rex. When I talk about market instruments, it includes sort of the book and claim system for SAF, for sustainable aviation fuel, for example. So currently the sort of the criteria does not allow for these market instruments to help you directly reduce your scope 1 or scope 3 emissions. So sort of potentially the new updates would allow having these. And also, I guess, another category that would relate to your question about Rex would be maybe employee commuting with the remote work, or sort of remote work where the company is allowed to purchase Rex on behalf of the employees' sort of remote work electricity emissions to offset that or to cover that usage. So things like that currently aren't allowed in the current Scope 3 protocol or guidance, but those are conversations that are ongoing about the role that market instruments like Rex or book and claim systems for SAF are allowed to play a role.
Thank you. That's helpful. I hope everyone here kind of really sees how much expertise we have internally. And if any other questions pop into your head throughout the day or in the following weeks, please do reach out either through our newsletter, if that's how you found us, or LinkedIn, or we have a kind of general inbox. I'll put on the screen here for a moment. If anyone else has additional questions, we have many more friendly faces that can help you. So don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you again so much for joining today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.